In this video, I'm going to talk about the book Embracing Complexity: Strategic Perspectives for an Age of Turbulence, a smart 250-page introduction to complexity and its implications for behavior. Jean Bolton is a former theoretical physicist turned consultant. Her passions are complexity and systems thinking, and their impact on how organizations, including development agencies, commence their work. To write the book, she collaborated with fellow rebellious physicist Peter Allen and strategy theorist and practitioner Cliff Bowman. Covering both science and management, scholarship and practice, the book's descriptions of science are authoritative, but its examples of transforming the way we live and work in the world are real and accessible. The purpose of this book is to introduce complexity to life, explain the importance of loosening the grip of the modernist worldview with its expectations of prediction, certainty, and control. This book explains what it means to say that the world is complex, and examines what that means for managers, policymakers, and individuals. The first part of the book deals with complexity theory and ideas. This is explained in a thorough but non-mathematical way. It compares alternative approaches and additionally provides a historical perspective on how such thinking has existed since the dawn of civilization. It highlights the difference between the complex worldview and the dominant mechanical worldview that underpins much of current management practice. It defines a complex worldview as the perception that the world is interconnected and shaped by historical and contextual details. A comparison of different approaches to modeling complexity is unique in its depth and accessibility. Introduction. This chapter explains the purpose of the book: to explain complexity theory and contrast it with the mechanical worldview and the ideology of the informal market. It explains why complex thinking is important. Because using wrong science as a blanket way of understanding the world leads to critical decisions and a less sustainable and just world. The complexity of the worldview is summarized as a subject of a systematic, emergent, path and context-dependent, irreversible transition into the new age. The introduction guides you through the rest of the book and explains who it's intended for, and summarized the historical background of the thought, the nature of complex worlds. This chapter uses a description of the forest life cycle to illustrate various aspects of complexity theory. It describes chaos, self-organization, self-regulation, emergence, change, and lock-in. Using this coherent empirical explanation, we get to the heart of complexity theory, specifically explaining the centrality of interpretation and disorder that creates resilience and leads to adaptation and change. It reflects the similarities and differences between forest and human systems, and between steady and turbulent conditions. It introduces the concepts of linearity and nonlinearity, and explains why some situations seem simple and amenable to linear analysis. Unpacking complexity. This chapter outlines the basics of complexity theory from various angles, but without any mathematical bias. Complexity has been described as the dance between established patterns and events, and the unique properties that can invade and destabilize such patterns. Compare complexity with systems thinking. Define what a complex system is. Discover how Prigogine combines physics and evolution to advance our understanding of open system dynamics. It notes the characteristics of the complex world: systematic, synergistic, multi-scale, resilience to volatility and volatility, dependent on history and context, ability to flip into modern regimes, ability to have multiple futures, self-defining the emergence of fundamentally new capabilities to organize and lead the world. Have we ever thought like this? This chapter deals with the history of science and philosophy. beginning with Taoism and pre-Socratic times, singles out key moments, and shows how ideas of generation, flux, and complex worlds entered and exited the history of ideas. It explains the ancient cosmology of how mechanical science arose and was incorporated into the social sciences, and why this is questionable. It considers classical statistical mechanics and thermodynamics, then considers evolution's central role in transforming thinking in many fields, and at length gives a brief overview of modern science and its relationship to complexity. This chapter shows that ancient cosmology and complex thinking reach much the same conclusion: complexity theory of complexity. This chapter details various approaches to modeling complex systems, shows how various assumptions are made in their development, and explains how such we comment on the pros and cons of different degrees of simplification in the model. It explains what mathematical modeling remains and defines associated terms: state space, nonlinearity, power law, stationarity, attractor, chaos. This is the most technical and challenging chapter. It is significant and unique to provide an extensive and thorough overview of various models and compare them in non-mathematical language. These various models are important because they are merged into the literature and can lead to assumptions about real-world complexity. The second part of the book uses this complex lens to examine issues of management, strategy, economics, and international development. Also, research to explore new systematic and path-dependent aspects of situations, considering how to make it easier for others to appreciate the implications of adopting a complex rather than a mechanical worldview. This is a substantial book that makes fundamentally important points about the key assumptions and applications of Western science. Applications frequently refer to real-world situations and show how complexity theory can help people better understand and develop projects. Final thoughts. What I hope you will get out of this book. This chapter encapsulates the dialogue between the authors as they ponder what they each desire to take from this book and what they consider to be of great importance from their own perspective. Considerations on the role and dangers of mathematical modeling. The importance of acting as locally as possible in the implementation of social and economic policies. The importance of shifting mindsets instead of just focusing on tools. The dangers of assuming that self-organization is somehow good, and how this relates to free markets. The importance of values. The way pre-modern thinking was empirically derived is remarkably consistent with the new science of complexity. I agree with it, all things considered. I think this book can be included in your reading list for understanding complexity. Embracing Complexity adopts a critical stance against general ideas about computational thinking, which requires complex thinking as a way to understand how decompositions, pattern recognition, generalizations, and algorithms work. For instance, pattern recognition as part of computational thinking represents the process of identifying patterns in a data set to categorize, process, and resolve the information more effectively. Patterns are pieces or sequences of data that have one or multiple similarities,